Good evening, everyone. AJ Ford back again with a brand new movie review, but this time I'm doing something a bit different. Since we're in the Halloween season now, I thought it would be appropriate to name my top 10 favorite movies to watch during the Halloween season. Of course, this is all opinion based, and there might be some movies that you might not agree with, or there might be one movie that you thought I might have left out. This is my list, so let's not waste any time. Let's count down my top 10 favorite movies to watch on Halloween. Number 10 is Friday the 13th, the original. Friday the 13th is one of the slasher films to define all slasher films. Even though Jason is not in this, there's no denying that this movie has had a great impact on horror movie fans. With Jason Voorhees or not, when the movie first came out, it was terrifying. We never knew who the killer was until the very end, and I find that gripping. I say this because predicting that the killer is going to pop up and kill someone is not scary. But knowing that the killer is around, leaving you completely exposed and vulnerable, that's terrifying. And yet not knowing who the killer actually is, that's even more terrifying. That's where the killer from Friday the 13th comes in. Remember, Jason doesn't even appear until the third one, but the pattern that all of them have, Jason or no Jason, they don't have a method or reason. He just kills and enjoys every second of it. Not expecting someone to get killed, yet knowing they're going to get killed is one of the most clever things you can achieve in a horror movie, as it creates suspense and tension. Friday the 13th does that perfectly. Number 9 is Zombieland. Of course I had to put this on. This is probably one of the best horror comedies in the past decade. It's hilarious, it's gory, and while not very scary, I must admit there are intense moments I have to give the film credit for. Its idea of having the entire human race almost completely gone and being replaced by zombies and strategies on how to avoid being bitten is so awesome and so funny that you can't help but either cheer when the zombies get killed or laugh. I also love how it's not about actually killing the zombies, but it's more of a subplot. This movie does focus on the zombies, but I think it mainly focuses about Columbus's life, who was played by Jesse Eisenberg, and how the zombie apocalypse has affected his life and the challenges and the people that he meets. I find this movie to be more of a character study than anything, mainly because it's told from Columbus's point of view. Overall, Zombieland is an incredibly fun, funny, and a very clever satire of the zombie movie genre. Number 8 is You're Next. A more independent movie, and yes, I know many people don't like this movie, and for some part I can see why. But for the most part, I see it as a energized, hilarious, and unbelievably badass film. It might not be the scariest film, but you can't say you weren't hooked by at least some of it, especially the third act. I love how this movie focuses on its characters, because the characters in this movie are actually important to know so you can actually relate to them and get to know them. Also, the script is really clever for a movie like this. It's surprisingly really funny, but when it gets dark, it gets really dark as it just builds and builds to that unbelievable third act. The final act of the movie is intense, badass, and actually pretty scary. I was hooked throughout the entire thing, and honestly, I think critics and audiences are being too harsh on this. I honestly think You're Next is an underrated Halloween classic and an overall fantastic movie. Number 7 is The Cabin in the Woods. When I first heard about this movie, I thought it was going to be the stupidest idea ever. But then I actually heard it's a satire to really bad horror movies, and I made the dumbest mistake of waiting really long to see this. The Cabin in the Woods is one of the most ingenious horror movies I have ever seen, and it's one of the best horror movies of the millennium. I don't think I've ever heard people get so passionate about not spoiling this film. This film is not meant to ever be spoiled. It's just something you have to see for yourself in order to understand. The final act of the film is probably the most engaging thing I might have seen in a horror movie. It keeps you on the edge of your seat, and it hooks you and makes you feel for the characters. But it's so refreshing, and it does not disappoint when it comes to the ending. I will not spoil anything, but it's so satisfying. The Cabin in the Woods is one of the most engaging and hilarious horror movies I have ever seen, but don't let anyone spoil it for you. Number 6 is Murder Party, another more obscure horror movie. Murder Party is one I would put in my most underrated movies. Fun fact. It follows a man who gets an invitation to a murder party. He decides to go and ends up meeting some of the most deranged and psychotic people ever. This film has some sort of meaning of superiority without having the audience know how each character defines it, but what the viewer does know is that you feel like they know that they need it. For the entire movie, you try to figure out which of the people at the murder party is more dangerous, and each reveal gets funnier and more messed up. Overall, Murder Party is a really clever horror comedy that might actually mean more than you think. Number 5 is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the Disney version. I put this on because this pretty much was my childhood, and this movie is Halloween. Although maybe a little too scary for kids, there is no denying that this is a timeless classic that definitely left a huge impact on our childhoods. What I love most about this one is how mature it actually is. It's not afraid to be edgy without being too edgy. This movie is kind of a prime example of kind of teaching our kids that scares and shocks are just another part of life, and it deals with that sort of moral in a really mature manner. Overall, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is a timeless classic that's for sure a real gem. Number 4 is The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, not the crappy remakes and sequels that followed. Those just don't exist. This is a slasher movie to define all slasher movies. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the time was the scariest movie to be shown, and I can understand why. This movie shows violence in probably the creepiest and most subtle way. By that I mean most of it is off screen. I find that very smart because it creates more and more tension, because even though you don't see it, you know the kids are dying, and you want at least some of them to make it out okay. This has got to be one of the darkest movies I've ever seen, but for good reason. It's to show the deep danger that these people are in for when they go into this psychotic killer's house. It is the perfect example of how you can make the mounting paranoia creep over the audience, but not necessarily rush it. This movie takes time to let the violence and scares happen, and it does feel slow, but when it happens, it is intense and it does not disappoint. This movie is a true horror masterpiece. Number 3 is An American Werewolf in London. The reason why I love this movie so much is pretty much just the concept. It's really cool by anyone's standards, and it makes the movie even more fun to kind of think about. I also think it's genius to have a concept like this and be able to throw humor into it. This movie is hilarious and honestly never gets old, and I quote this movie a lot. The special effects and makeup are also some of the best I've ever seen, even by today's standards. The way they make the werewolf in this is so creepy that I can't help but get a little uncomfortable just looking at it, because it honestly looks really real. And who could forget the transformation scene? I won't go too in depth with it, but I'll just say it's very memorable. Overall, An American Werewolf in London is not only one of my favorite movies to watch on Halloween, but it's one of my favorite movies, period. Number 2 is Shaun of the Dead. Yes, I know it seems like kind of a stretch, but hey, who can blame me? This has got to be one of the most clever zombie movies I've ever seen, as well as the funniest. It not only satirizes zombie films, but it somehow still stays faithful to them. Trust me when I say there are a lot of jokes hidden in the background and in the front, but I think most of the humor comes from the selfishness and stupidity of the characters. They provide lots and lots of laughs, and director Edgar Wright's trademark energy definitely plays a part in that as well. But it's really special to me specifically because it still works as a traditional zombie movie. There's still a lot of suspense, and there's still those tough choices where sacrifices have to be made, like in the ending. Overall, this is a really clever movie altogether, and it manages to satirize the zombie genre as well as stay faithful to it. And it is absolutely one of my favorite movies ever. And my number 1 favorite movie to watch during Halloween is Halloween. Yeah, I know. I have the movie Halloween on my Halloween movies list, but come on. This is the movie to put the slasher genre in its place. When this movie came out, people went nuts, saying that it was the scariest movie ever. It's so creepy, etc. Yet watching it now, it does seem cliche. You know there's a killer trying to kill the girl. But again, at the time, no one has ever seen anything like that before. It's ingenious because it takes this story and manages to make it tense, and Michael Myers, as the killer, never speaks. But he is terrifying. You start to realize more that he has a backstory and he has a reason to do what he does. It's a horrible, disgusting reason, but it's still a reason. Director John Carpenter really knew just how much attention to put into this masterpiece, and he never went too far, even though at the time it was considered terrifying. Overall, Halloween is a masterpiece. It is terrifying, and it is my favorite Halloween movie. Thank you guys for watching. I really hope you like my list, and if you don't, that's fine. Just don't complain if your favorite Halloween movie isn't on here. Remember, that's just my opinion.